The Kingdom of Bazen was located in the region that corresponds to part of modern-day Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. It was located near other early kingdoms like Damat and later the Aksumite Empire, which overshadowed many smaller regional polities. The kingdom thrived during the early 1st century BCE, though precise dates are challenging to confirm due to the scarcity of primary records. The kingdom thrived during the early 1st century millennium BCE. It was one of the several small kingdoms in the region that emerged before the rise of the Aksumite Empire, which unified much of the area and became a major trading power. Like other kingdoms in the region, Bazen engaged in agricultural, animal husbandry, and trade. The kingdom's location played a crucial role involvement in the Red Sea trade routes, exchanging goods such as ivory, gold, incense with neighboring regions and distant lands like Arabia and the Mediterranean. The cultural and the religious practice of Bazen reflected a mixture of indigenous African traditions and influence from Saudi Arabia, given the region's interaction across the Red Sea. Archaeological evidence from neighboring regions suggests links to Sabian culture evident in architecture, inscriptions, and religious practice. The rise of Kingdom of Aksum led to the decline of smaller polities like Bazen. The consolidation of power by Aksum resulted absorption of regions previously controlled by kingdoms such as Bazen. Archaeological findings in the region, including ancient ruins, inscriptions, and artifacts, provided indirect evidence of the existence of earlier kingdoms like Bazen. However, much of its history remained speculative due to limited excavations and written records. The kingdom of Bazen is primarily reconstructed from archaeological and linguistic evidence. While direct reference to the kingdoms are scarce, its existence is hypothesized through its association with the pre-Aksumite period in the Horn of Africa, particularly in the region that later formed the heart of the Aksumite Empire. Bazen's reign began during the early first millennium BCE to the earlier century CE. It coexisted with other smaller polities such as Damat, which was active in the northern highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Together, these kingdoms were part of complex network of early civilizations that thrived due to their strategic location. Bazen's location in the highlands and coastal area of modern-day Eritrea and parts of northern Tigray, Ethiopia placed critical position for regional trade and cultural exchange. Its proximity to the Red Sea coast facilitates interactions with Saudi Arabia, especially the Sabian kingdoms whose cultural and linguistic influences can be observed in the inscriptions and architectural remains of the region. Nile Valley civilizations, such as ancient Egypt and Kush, Nubia, with whom they might have traded goods like incense, ivory, and gold. Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade route through which goods and ideas flow, making Bazen a potential intermediary in this exchange. The culture of Bazen would have been a fusion of indigenous African traditions and South Arabian influences. This culture synthesizes was characteristics of the pre-Aksumite kingdom. The use of Ge'ez script, driven from the Sabian alphabet, points to South Arabia influences. Over time, this evolved into the Ge'ez script used in Ethiopia and Eritrea today. Religious practices likely involved the worship of local deity, with evidence suggesting that South Arabia gods like Al-Maka, associated with the moon, may have been venerated. Indigenous African religious traditions, including ancestral veneration, would have been central to daily life. Pre-Aksumite ruins such as stones, temples, and inscriptions exhibit a blend of South Arabian and indigenous African styles. Bazen's economy was driven by agriculture, pastoralism, and trade. The fertile highlands provide a resource for growing crops like barley, wheat, and teff. The region was known for its cattle and camel, vital for trade and transport. Goods such as ivory and gold were valuable exports. Incense, frankincense, and myrrh prized in indigenous ceremonies across the ancient world. Bazen served as a node in a larger network connecting the interior of Africa to the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and other worlds. Bazen was part of dynamic culture and political landscape, interacting with neighboring kingdoms and civilizations. The Matak kingdom, based in northern Ethiopia, shared many cultural and linguistic traits with Bazen. The ancient South Arabian kingdom played a significant role in shaping Bazen's early development through trade and cultural exchange. Archaeological evidence of Sabian inscriptions in Eritrea and Ethiopia underscores this connection. As the Aksumite kingdom rose to power in early century CE, it absorbed smaller kingdoms like Bazen. Aksum's later dominance obscured much of the territory of its predecessors, including Bazen. The decline of Bazen, like other pre-Aksumite kingdoms, was likely due to political consolidation, emergence of Aksum as a centralized power that unified the region, shift in the trade routes. Aksum's dominance over the Red Sea trade routes may have marginalized smaller kingdoms like Bazen. Cultural assimilation. Bazen's traditions and cultural identities were likely absorbed into the a broader Aksumite culture, leaving a few distinct traces. Although overshadowed by Aksum, Bazen and other pre-Aksumite polities laid the groundwork for Ge'ez civilization. Their script and cultural practices influenced the later development of Ge'ez, Ethiopia's classical language. Trade networks, the economic and trade system they established were expanded and formalized by Aksum. Cultural fusion, the blending of African and South Arabian traditions in Bazen shaped the unique cultural identity of the region. Archaeological studies in Matra, Kwahito, and other sites in Eritrea and Ethiopia provide glimpses into the pre-Aksumite period. However, challenges remain. Limited excavation. The region has not been extensively excavated, leaving many questions unanswered. Lack of written records. Most of what we know about Bazen comes from indirect evidence, as there are no surviving texts from the kingdom itself. The historical narrative is heavily focused on Aksum, making it harder to reconstruct the history of smaller kingdoms like Bazen. Bazen's location near the Red Sea coast and highlands means it was ideal position to engage in both regional and international trade. This trade was vital part of the kingdom's economy and its interactions with neighboring regions. The region was rich in frankincense and myrrh, prized commodities in the ancient religious and funerary rituals in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mediterranean. Ivory, sourced from African elephants. Ivory was highly valued in Saudi Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean for making luxury goods. The highlands of Eritrea and Ethiopia were known for their deposits of gold. Gold traded as far as the Near East and India. Bazen was connected to ancient maritime routes that linked Africa, Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean. Overland routes through the highlands enabled goods to move between the African interior and coastal ports. Bazen acquired goods such as Saudi Arabian pottery, Roman glassware, and Indian textiles. Saudi Arabia proximity to the Sabian fostered regular trade exchanges. Inscriptions and architectural style hint at long-standing connections. Egypt and Kush. These Nile Valley civilizations were important consumers of Bazen's incense, ivory, and gold. The Mediterranean world, as early as the Hellenistic period, demand for incense and gold linked Bazen indirectly with Greece and Rome. Religion in Bazen reflected the rich cultural blending of indigenous African traditions and South Arabian influences. Al-Makka likely borrowed from Sabian religion. Al-Makka was associated with the moon and agriculture. A temple dedicated to him may have existed in Bazen. local gods and spirits, indigenous deities related to fertility, rain, and the land were likely worshipped alongside South Arabian gods. Ancestral worship, reverence for ancestor was common practice in African traditions and likely persisted in Bazen. Religious practices, a temple and the rituals. Archaeological evidence from nearby pre-Aksumite sites suggests the construction of stone temples and altars, where offerings such as incense and animal sacrifice were made. Astral worship, the use of astronomical symbol in inscriptions hints at the importance of celestial bodies in their religion. With the rise of Aksum, Bazen's religious practices were absorbed into a broader syncretic tradition. By the 4th century CE, Christianity began to take hold in the region under Axumite rule, further transforming the religious landscape. Bazen was part of vibrant culture milieu that combined indigenous African traditions with influences from Saudi Arabia, the Nile Valley, and beyond. Early inscriptions in Bazen used as a script derived from the Sabian alphabet. Over time, this evolved into the Giz script, which remains significant in Ethiopia and Eritrean literatural traditions. Bilingual society, the use of both African and South Arabian language in inscriptions suggests a culture-blended society. Architecture, Sabian influences, temple monuments and inscriptions from the region show architectural styles reminiscent of Saudi Arabia. Local inventions, indigenous elements such as circular structures and unique stone masonry are evident in the ruins. Kings and nobility, the ruling class likely controlled the trade and region, playing a central role in regional politics. Merchants and artisans. Trade networks supported a class of skilled artisans and merchants who facilitate economic prosperity. Common people, farmers and herders, formed the backbone of the economy, sustaining both local and export demands. Archaeological evidence. Most of what we know about Bazen comes from archaeological discoveries in Eritrea and northern Ethiopia, while Bazen itself remains elusive. Nearby pre-Aksumite sites provide a valuable clue. Key site: Kwahito, Eritrea. Located on a plateau, Kwahito was a pre-Aksumite city that likely had cultural and economic ties to Bazen. The site includes rock-hewn structure, evidence of terrace farming, religious altar and script inscriptions. Mantra, Eritrea. Another important site, Mantra has yielded artifacts and inscriptions from both the pre-Aksumite and Aksumite periods, hinting at continuous occupation. Yaha, Ethiopia. Often considered the center of the Damatas kingdom, Yaha has monumental Sabian-style temples and inscriptions that reflect cultural exchange relevant to Bazen. Artifacts, inscriptions, gaze text carved on the stones, stelae and temple walls, pottery, local produced ceramics, as well as imported South Arabian and Mediterranean wares. Tools and jewelries, items made from bronze, gold, and iron, showcasing local craftsmanship. Challenges in archaeology, fragmentary evidence. Few sites have been excavated systematically, making it difficult to piece together a full history. Later Aksumite structure often overlie earlier pre-Aksumite ruins, complicating efforts to identify Bazen's specific artifacts. The Kingdom of Bazen played pivotal role in the early history of the Horn of Africa. Its strategic location enabled it to thrive as a center of trade, religion, and culture exchange, bridging Africa, Arabia, and the ancient world. However, the kingdom's legacy, obscured by the rise of Aksumite Empire, which absorbed and built upon the foundation laid by Bazen and its contemporaries. Kohito is one of the most significant pre-Aksumite archaeological sites and may have had strong connections to Bazen. Rock-cut tombs and altars. These structures suggest advanced engineering and religious practices. Terraced agriculture. Evidence of extensive terrace indicates that the area was an agriculture hub. Trade links. Its proximity to the Red Sea implies that it serves as a waypoint for goods moving between the coast and the interior. Cultural artifacts. Items such as pottery and tools reveal blend of local craftsmanship and imported influences. Relevance to Bazen. Cohitos artifacts and inscriptions are consistent with the cultural milieu of Bazen. The site likely reflects the shared traditions of pre-Aksumite polities, including trade and religious practices. Mantra Eritrea. Mantra, another key site, spans both the pre-Aksumite and Aksumite period. It provides a window into the transitional era when the smaller kingdoms like Bazen were incorporated into Aksum. Key features: stelae fields. Stone stelae, often scripted, mark burial sites and may commemorate local rulers or elites. Inscriptions written in the Giz script. These inscriptions offer insight into the language and governance of the era. Cultural layers. Stratified remains showed how the pre-Aksumite traditions merged with later Aksumite culture. Mantra's continuity highlights how smaller kingdoms like Bazen were absorbed and influenced by the expanding Aksumite Empire. Yaha, Ethiopia. Though more closely associated with the kingdom of Damat, Yaha's monumental architecture and inscriptions are crucial for understanding the cultural and political environment shared by Bazen. The Great Temple, a massive Sabian-style stone structure believed to be dedicated to Almaka artistic blend. The site exhibits a fusion of Saudi Arabian and African elements, from building techniques to religious iconography. Artifacts. Items like ceremonial vessels and tools reflect both local and imported materials. Yaha likely influenced Bazen's religious and architectural traditions. The Sabian connection seen here would have extended across the region. Cultural connections of Bazen. Saudi Arabian influence. The kingdom of Bazen was deeply influenced by the Sabian culture of Saudi Arabia. This influence is evident in several areas. Written language. The Giz inscriptions found in pre-Aksumite sites, including those potential linked to Bazen, are derived from the Sabian scripts. Over time, this evolved into the Giz script used in the Aksumite Empire and still in use in Ethiopia and Eritrea liturgical traditions. The worship of Almaka and other Saudi Arabian deities suggests that Bazen shared religious ties with the Sabians. The blending of Saudi Arabian and indigenous African spiritual practices likely led to unique religious traditions. Architectures. The use of large, finely cut stones blocks in temple and public buildings reflects Sabian techniques. Local inventions such as circular stone structure show how Bazen adapted foreign influences to local needs. African indigenous traditions. While Saudi Arabian influences are prominent, indigenous African traditions were equally important in shaping Bazen's identity. Social organization. The importance of kinship, clan-based governance, and ancestral veneration persisted in Bazen and later became part of Aksumite society. Local crafted pottery and tools, distinct from Sabian imports, reflect strong indigenous tradition of craftsmanship, agriculture, and livelihood. The terraced farming techniques seen in Quahito and other sites were uniquely adapted to the highlands and reflected the ingenuity of the local farmers. Transition to Aksumite Empire. Aksumite Empire absorption of Bazen. As Aksumites emerged as dominant regional power, circa 1st century CE, smaller kingdoms like Bazen were absorbed. This transition likely occurred through combination of military conquest. Aksum expanded its territory by force. Economic integration, control of trade routes allowed Aksum to dominate economically. Cultural assimilation. Pre-Aksumite traditions were incorporated into Aksum culture, creating synthesis of African and Arabian influences. Impact of Bazen's legacy. While the independent identity of Bazen faded, its contributions were preserved in Aksum culture. Language. Ge'ez became the Ge'ez language central to Aksumite governance and religion. Pre-Aksumite gods and practices influenced early Aksumite religion before the adoption of Christianity. Trade. Bazen's role as a trading hub helped lay the groundwork for Aksum's prominence in the Red Sea commerce. Life of King Bazen. The king would have been the central figure in governance, overseeing alliance, trade, and military affairs, as Bazen was likely a smaller kingdom compared to later Aksum kings probably ruled in collaboration with local elites or tribal leaders. Religious authority. Kings often held dual role as both secular rulers and religious leaders. They likely preside over major ritual and ceremonies, acting as intermediaries between the people and the god. Trade facilitator. Given Bazen's location on the key trade routes, the king likely played significant role in maintaining relationship with neighboring regions like Saudi Arabia, Kush, and early Aksum. This include negotiation trade agreements and ensuring the flow of incense, gold, and ivory. Lifestyle. Kings may have lived in a stone-built place or fortified compound similar to the pre-Aksumite architecture remains at the site like Yaha and Quahito. The king's wealth was likely displayed through fine clothing, jewelry, and ceremonial regalia, with materials sourced from locals and imported goods. Court life. The royal court would have included advisors, priests, military leaders, and artisans. Banquets, ceremonies, and diplomatic receptions would have been central to court life. Kingship may have been hereditary, with succession passing through familial lines. In some African traditions, matrilineal inheritance tracing lineage through the mother was also common. Challenges to power. Succession disputes, tribal rivalries, or external threats would destabilize the kingdom, requiring the king to maintain a strong alliance. Burial practice. Royal tombs. Kings were likely buried in elaborate tombs or stelae, marked graves. Evidence from nearby pre-Aksumite sites like Yaha suggests the use of rock-hewn chamber or stone-lined burial sites. Tombs might have included items like poetry, jewelry, and weapons intended to accompany the king into the afterlife. Funerary rituals. Ceremonies would have involved offerings of incense, food, and possibly animal sacrifices. Priests or shamans would have overseen rituals to honor the king's spirit and secure their place in the afterlife. Ancestral veneration. Deceased kings might have been revered as ancestral spirits, with ongoing ritual performed at their tombs to ensure blessings for the kingdom. Historical memory. Inscriptions or monuments could have been erected to commemorate the king's reign, highlighting achievements like military victories, trade expansions, or religious contributions. The lack of direct historical records about Bazen king makes it difficult to reconstruct detailed biography. Most information comes from indirect sources such as pre-Aksumite inscriptions, archaeological remains, and comparisons with neighboring societies like Damata and early Aksum. The suggestion that King Bazen or Balthazar in some Christian traditions was one of the Magi who visited Jesus at his birth is fascinating and enduring legend. While there is no indirect historical evidence linked Bazen to the biblical accounts, this association reflects the blend of history, myth, and faith that often surrounds ancient figures. The myth of King Bazen as one of the Magi. Who were the Magis? The Magis are described in the Gospel of Matthew as wise men from the east who follow a star to a Bethlehem to honor the birth of Jesus. Though their number is not specific in the Bible, tradition holds that there were three, representing three gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Connection to Bazen. Geographical proximity. Bazen ruled a kingdom in the Horn of Africa, a region historically tied to the Red Sea trade network. This region was renowned for exporting frankincense and myrrh, two of the gifts brought by the Magi. The East, mentioned in the Bible, could be interpreted as including region east of the Nile and near the Red Sea. Ethiopia and Eritrean traditions. Local Christian traditions, particularly in Ethiopia and Eritrea, sometimes associate King Bazen with the Magi. The traditions arose as a Christianity spread in the region during the Aksumite period. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has long celebrated the Magi's visit as part of their religious heritage, seeing connections between their ancient rulers and biblical events. Bazen, as a wise and possibly devout king, fits the image of Magi seeking divine truth. His association with the Magi underscores the region's historical importance in global spiritual narrative. Some traditions identify Bazen as a historical king who ruled around the 1st century BCE to 1st century CE. He may have been part of the pre-Aksumite culture that later influenced the Aksumite Empire. Bazen would have controlled the flow of income and mere valuable commodities that would explain his link to the Magi story. Religious influences. As a ruler, he might have considered over ritual involving these sacred substances, further connecting him to the gift brought to the Christ. If Bazen were one of the Magi, his death would have carried immense spiritual significance. According to local legends, some suggest he may have been buried in a royal tomb near Yaha or Kahito, where a stela and a rock-hewn stone have been found. Deification. Over time, Bazen might have been revered as a saint or ancestral figure, especially after the rise of Christianity in the region. Christian legacy. The story of Bazen as one of the Magi reflects the region's role in early Christianity. Conversion to Christianity. By the 4th century CE, the Aksumite Empire adopted Christianity, and legends of earlier kings like Bazen were woven into the Christian narrative. Ethiopia and Eritrean churches commemorate the Magi during Epiphany, and the association with Bazen adds local dimension to the celebration, blending history and faith. The history of Bazen as Magi highlights the interplay between historical figures and the spiritual imagination. While historical evidence for Bazen's role as one of the Magi remains elusive, the legend underscores the ancient kingdom of Bazen's religious and trade network of the ancient world, how the region's history became part of global narrative, blending fact and faith. While historical evidence for Bazen's role as one of the Magis remain elusive, the legend underscores the ancient kingdom of Bazen's importance in the linguistic, religious, and trade network of the ancient world, how the region's history became part of global narrative, blending fact and faith. Timeline of Bazen's legacy and its evolution. 1st century BCE, 1st century CE, the historical era of King Bazen. Region of Bazen. King Bazen or Bazen is believed to have ruled in the region corresponding to modern Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. His reign coincides with the flourishing of pre-Aksumite culture, marked by the development of trade networks linking Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Mediterranean. During this time, frankincense, myrrh, and gold were among the most valuable trade goods. The visit of the Magi. According to the Christian traditions, wise men from the east visited Jesus in Bethlehem shortly after his birth, bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In later interpretations, Bazen was retroactively identified as one of these Magi, likely due to the region's reputation as source of the sacred commodities. 4th century CE, Christianity of the Aksumite Empire, adoption of Christianity under King Ezana, the Aksumite Empire, successor to earlier kingdom like Bazen, officially adopts Christianity around 330 to 340 CE. This marks one of the earliest official Christian states in the world. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church begins incorporating local traditions into Christian theology, including stories of pre-Christian rulers, integration of Bazen into Christian lore. As Christianity spreads, oral traditions about King Bazen's wisdom and connection to the Magi become part of local religious identity. The gifts of the Magi, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, are symbolically tied to Ethiopia's historical role as provider of these sacred goods. 5th and 6th century CE expansion of Christian influences. The Nine Saints. Missionaries from the Roman and Byzantine world arrived in the Aksum Empire, spreading monasticism and further Christianizing the local culture. These saints reinforced the narrative of Ethiopia's ancient ties to biblical events, including the Magi. Emergence of religious texts. Local Christian texts began to incorporate apocryphal traditions about figures like the Magi, associating them with ancient Ethiopian rulers. Medieval period. 7th and 15th century CE, canonization of the legend. Zagawe dynasty, 12th to 13th century, the Solomonic rulers who claimed descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba reinforced Ethiopia's biblical connections. The legend of Bazen as one of the Magi gains prominence as part of this broader narrative of Ethiopia's biblical heritage. Epiphany celebration. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church integrates the Magi into its liturgical calendar, particularly during the Feast of Epiphany, Timkat. Bazen is sometimes honored as local connection to the story. 16th century presents revival and preservation, oral and written tradition. Stories about Bazen continue to be passed down, blending historical and religious themes. The legend of Bazen as a wise king aligns with Ethiopia's role as custodian of early Christianity in Africa. Archaeologists and historians study pre-Aksumite sites like Yaha and Kwahito, uncovering evidence of ancient kingdoms like Bazen and their role in Red Sea trade. The connection to the Magi remains more symbolic than factual, but underscores the cultural significance of the legend. During Timkat Epiphany, Ethiopia and Eritrean Orthodox Christians celebrate the baptism of Jesus and commemorate the gift of the Magi. Local depictions of the Magi often emphasize African representation, reinforcing the link to Bazen. Geographical and economical significance. The Horn of Africa historical role in the incense trade made it a literal candidate for the associating its rulers with the Magi. Religious identity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has long emphasized Ethiopia's biblical heritage, from the Ark of the Covenant to the Magi. Bazen fits into this narrative as wise and devout ruler. The association with Bazen highlights Ethiopia and Eritrea's contribution to global history and Christianity, fostering national pride. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church plays a central role in preserving and celebrating the traditions of the Magi, including the possible association of King Bazen with this biblical story. This is achieved through religious practices, festival, and cultural teaching. The story of the Magi visiting Jesus is read from the Gospel of Matthew during the Christmas. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church emphasizes the Magi's spiritual significance, portraying them as a symbol of wisdom and devotion who recognize Christ's divine nature. Church teachings and oral traditions have woven Bazen into the Magi story as a symbol of Ethiopia's role in biblical history. This aligns with the broader Ethiopian Christian belief that their nation holds a unique place in God's plan, exemplified by connections to the Queen of Sheba and the Ark of the Covenant. Timkat, the Feast of Epiphany. Overview of Timkat. Timkat, Amharic for baptism. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, most vibrant and significant festival celebrated annually on January 19 or January 20 in a leap year, commemorates the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan River and also reflects on the broader revelations of his divine nature to the world, including the visit of the Magi. The Ark of the Covenant replicas from the local churches are in grand possession, symbolizing the presence of God. Holy water rituals, clergy and laity gathered at the river or pools where water is blessed, and believers reenact the baptism of Jesus by immersing themselves in the water. Magi symbolism. During the liturgy, the story of the Magi is read as part of the Epiphany narrative. Frankincense and myrrh, reminiscent of the Magi's gift, are burned during prayers, connecting the congregation to the ancient gift. Cultural elements. Traditional Ethiopian dress, music, and dance add festival atmosphere to celebration. Local communities may also honor figures like Bazen, emphasizing Ethiopia's spiritual and historical ties to the Magi. Artistic depiction of the magic. Icon and church arts. Ethiopian Orthodox churches often feature frescoes and icons of the Magi depicted as wise men of diverse origins with at least one figure representing Africa. King Bazen, if referenced, is portrayed in royal attire, symbolizing his wisdom and devotion. The church liturgical texts and hymns incorporate reference to the Magi and their gift, highlighting Ethiopia's connection to this biblical event. Preservation through monasteries and oral tradition. Monasteries such as Debre Damo and Debre Libanos serve as centers of historical and religious preservation, safeguarding ancient manuscripts and oral traditions that mention Ethiopia's ties to biblical figures like the Magi. Oral traditions. Priests, elders, and storytellers continue to pass down the story of King Bazen and his connection to the Magi, keeping it alive for future generations. The connection to the Magi strengthens the sense of unity among Ethiopian and Eritrean Christians, emphasizing their connection heritage within global Christianity. Tourism and cultural promotion. Timkat attracts international visitors, showcasing the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's unique traditions, reinforcing Ethiopia's role in biblical history. Symbolism of the Magi's gift. Gold represents Christ's kingship. This could also symbolize the wealth of Ethiopia and its historical role as a trade hub. Frankincense represents Christ's divinity. Frankincense was one of the Horn of Africa's most prized exports. Myrrh represents Christ's humility and eventually suffering. Myrrh, another key product, links Ethiopia to the sacred practice of the ancient world. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church enduring focus on the Magi reflects its broader effort to tie Ethiopia's history to the biblical narrative. This enhances the cultural and spiritual identity of its followers and reinforces Ethiopia's claim as cradle of early Christianity. Timkat ritual and their significance. Timkat Epiphany is one of the most vibrant festivals in Ethiopia, celebrated with a mix of religious devotion, historical reverence, and cultural expansion. The celebration begins on the evening of January 18, known as Ketera, meaning to prepare. Tabot, replicas of the Ark of the Covenant, are carried in grand procession from their churches to nearby body of water, symbolizing the journey was baptized. Morning of Timkat, at dawn, priest blesses the water and reenactment of Jesus' baptism takes place. Congregants immerse themselves in the water to renew their faith and receive blessing. The Magi's role. The Magi are remembered during the liturgical reading, particularly for their gift of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which are seen as symbol of Ethiopia's ancient contribution to Christianity. Incense is burned in honor of the Magi, and their wisdom is praised as the example of devotion to Christ. Return of the Tabots. The Tabots are returned to their respective churches in grand procession with singing, dancing, and traditional instruments, symbolizing the divine blessing returned to the community. Timkat is both spiritual and communal celebration, emphasizing unity and shared faith. It draws parallels between biblical events and Ethiopia's Christian heritage, including the legends of King Bazen as one of the Magis. Ethiopian Orthodox tradition and the Magi. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church follows a unique liturgical calendar that incorporates stories of the Magi into a key celebration, especially during Christmas, Jena, and Epiphany, Timkat, Hyman's prayers, and scriptural readings during these periods highlights the Magi's journey symbolic gift. Frankincense and myrrh are Ethiopian Orthodox rituals reflecting the gift of the Magi. The burning of incense symbolizes prayers rising to heavens and honors Ethiopia's ancient role as supplier of these sacred materials. Historical sites connected to King Bazen and Magi. Yaha, the ancient religious center. In northern Ethiopia, Yaha is one of the most significant pre-Aksumite archaeological sites, home to the Great Temple, which dates back to around 700 BCE. This site was center of religious and political activity during Bazen's time. The temple reflects South Arabian influences, underscoring cultural and trade connections that might link Bazen to the Magi story. Kwahito, a trade and ritual hub. Near modern-day Eritrea, Kwahito was a strategic trade center and religious site. Its location on trade routes connecting the Red Sea to the African interior supports the idea that Bazen's kingdom facilitated the exchange of goods like frankincense and myrrh. Rock-hewn tombs and inscriptions hint at royal burials, possibly including Bazen. Aksum became the center of the Aksumite Empire, which succeeded Bazen's kingdom. Although associated with later rulers, Aksum preserved many traditions that may have originated in Bazen's era. The Church of St. Mary's of Zion, considered the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, reinforcing the region's biblical heritage. Mantra, a culture crossroad, archaeological site in Eritrea that shows evidence of pre-Aksumite settlement. Known for its stelae and ancient inscriptions, it may have been part of Bazen's kingdom, serving as cultural and religious hub. Modern pilgrimage and tourism. Pilgrimage sites. Believers and tourists visit these historical sites to connect with Ethiopia's ancient Christian roots and the legend of King Bazen. Timkat celebration often includes pilgrimage to rivers, lakes, or historical sites associated with biblical and Ethiopian traditions. Cultural tourism. Timkat attracts visitors from around the world, offering chance to witness unique ritual, procession, and historical landmarks tied to the Magis. Sites like Yaha and Aksum are major attractions showcasing the region's historical and religious importance. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church traditions, the celebration of Timkat, and the preservation of ancient sites all intertwined to keep the legend of King Bazen and the Magi alive. The elements not only celebrate Ethiopia's historical role in early Christianity but also reinforces its identity as a cradle of biblical heritage. Detailed description of historical sites. Detailed historical sites connected to King Bazen and Magi. Yaha, the cradle of the civilization. Northern Ethiopia near modern-day Aksum. The Great Temple. Key features: the Great Temple. A towering stone structure built around 700 BCE, believed to be center for the Sabian religion. It reflects early Saudi Arabian influences and Ethiopia's role as a trade hub. Artifacts, inscriptions, poetry, and other archaeological finds suggest thriving kingdom that predates Aksum. Connection to Bazen. Yaha might have been key religious site during Bazen's reign, symbolizing his kingdom's link to ancient trade routes that supplied the Magi's gift. Kwahito, the silent witness of history. Location: southern Eritrea, near the Asmara Plateau. Key features: rock-hewn tombs. These tombs may have housed royalty and religious leaders, possibly including Bazen or figures from his era. Inscriptions found on stelae and monuments. These writings hint at the spiritual and political life of the kingdom. Evidence of advanced irrigation and agricultural systems supports the region's importance in sustaining ancient kingdoms. Trade connections. Positioned on the route leading to the Red Sea, Kwahito likely played a role in exporting frankincense and myrrh. Aksum, the birthplace of Ethiopia's Christianity. Location: Tigray region, Ethiopia. Key features: obelisks of Aksum, massive granite stelae symbolizing royal power, predating Christianity but reflecting the grandeur of Bazen's successor. Church of St. Mary of Zion, the spiritual heart of Ethiopian Christianity. It's believed to house the Ark of the Covenant. Royal tombs, though not explicitly linked to Bazen, the tombs highlights the continuation of royal traditions that began with pre-Aksumite rulers. Matara, a trade nexus. Location: Eritrea, near the modern city of Senafe. Key features: ancient stelae. These markers suggest tradition of honoring the dead, possibly including rulers like Bazen. Trade relics. Artifacts reveal connection to South Arabia, the Mediterranean, and the African interior. A deeper dive into Timkat rituals and symbolism. Timkat is not only religious celebration but also profound expression of Ethiopia's identity and its ties to biblical history. Key elements of Timkat: the procession of the tabots. What are tabots? Tabots are wooden or stone replicas of the Ark of the Covenant, wrapped in ornate cloth and carried on the heads of priests. Each tabot represents the Holy of Holies from specific church, symbolism of the procession. The journey of the tabot to water bodies echoes the journey of faith with connection to the Magi's pilgrimage to Bethlehem. The procession reflects themes of renewal, unity, and reverence for divine mysteries. The blessing of the water, ritual details. At the dawn on Timkat, a bishop or senior priest blesses the water by dipping a cross into it, accompanied by a prayer and chant. Believers often collect this blessed water in containers to take home for spiritual. The blessed water represents the Jordan River and the purification of humanity through Christ's baptism. The reenactment signifies a signal and communal renewal of faith. The role of incense and the Magi's gifts, frankincense and myrrh. These are burned through the festival, symbolizing prayers, devotion, and Ethiopia's ancient role as supplier of these sacred substances. The gifts are linked to the Magic's wisdom and recognition of Christ's divinity. Golden tabots. The ornament covering the decoration of the tabots are a nod to the gift of gold, symbolizing Christ's kinship. Cultural celebration during Timkat, music and dance. Traditional instruments like the kebero, a drum, mesako, single-stringed instrument, and tesantisil sisterum are played during processions. Eskista, a traditional shoulder dance, is performed as part of their festivities. Traditional clothing, attendants, white shamas, cotton garments with colorful accents symbolizing purity and unity. Priests and the deacons wear richly embroidered robes and crowns, highlighting the spiritual grandeur of the occasions. Feasting and community unity. Families and communities come together to share meals and celebrate after the ritual. Timkat strengthens bonds and reinforces Ethiopia's rich cultural heritage. How these sites and rituals connect to Bazen and the Magi. Historical context. The pre-Aksumite kingdom ruled by Bazen facilitated the trade of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These items become central to Ethiopian Orthodox symbolism, linking the kingdom to the Magi story. The wider ritual of Timkat reflects the blessings believed to have originated from ancient ruler like Bazen, who were viewed as intermediaries between the divine and their people. Legacy through Timkat. The association of Bazen with the Magi elevates the significance of Timkat as more than baptismal celebration. It becomes reenactment of Ethiopia's role in global biblical history. By honoring the Magi and their gift, Timkat ties together Ethiopia's historical, religious, and cultural identity.